The applause was still echoing when Oluwaseun Adewale shattered his own marriage. Under the crystal chandeliers of Adewale Holdings' Grand Anniversary Gala in Lagos, he adjusted his cufflinks, smiled for the cameras, and announced that every empire needed a legacy and a wife who can give one. The room laughed. Mona El Sayed did not. She stood beside him, elegant in gold silk, her silence louder than the orchestra behind them. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a single word, whispered through the crowd barren. Minutes later, security escorted her across the polished marble lobby as investors pretended to check their phones. The doors closed behind her. No one followed. 15 years passed. Today, those same glass doors open again. Mona walks in steady, composed, 3 identical teenage boys at her side. Across the lobby, Oluwaseun freezes, because the faces of those boys look exactly like his. Before we continue, tell me, what country are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? If stories of justice, healing, and second chances speak to you, consider subscribing and walking this journey with us. 15 years earlier, before the applause turned cruel, and before silence replaced tenderness, Mona El Sayed believed her marriage was strong enough to survive anything. When she first arrived in Lagos as Oluwaseun Adewale's bride, she carried more than suitcases. She carried languages, traditions, and a quiet resilience shaped by Cairo's crowded streets and her father's disciplined household. She had met Seun at a development summit in Dubai, had the ambitious Nigerian tech investor expanding into North Africa. She, the logistics analyst who challenged his projections without flinching. He admired her mind before he admired her beauty. That had mattered. Their wedding blended cultures, Yoruba drums echoing beside Arabic ululations. Mama Bisi Adewale had smiled that day, regal in Aso Oke, holding Mona's hands and calling her, "my daughter." It had sounded sincere. The first year was gentle. Seun worked late, but he came home with stories, not excuses. Mona learned to cook jollof rice the way Mama Bisi preferred. She hosted board dinners with poise, speaking softly, yet confidently, about expansion plans when asked. She was not ornamental, she was involved. But by the second year, questions began to creep into conversations like uninvited guests. Any good news relatives would ask during Sunday visits. Mama Bisi's voice remained sweet, but her eyes lingered too long on Mona's abdomen. By year 3, sweetness faded. At a family gathering in Ibadan, an aunt laughed too loudly and said, "An empire cannot be inherited by silence." Mona smiled politely. Seun squeezed her hand under the table. That night he apologized for them. He promised he did not care what anyone said. "I married you," he whispered. "Not your womb." She believed him. The first fertility appointment was practical, almost hopeful. Dr. Tade Balogan's clinic in Victoria Island gleamed with white marble and framed certificates. He spoke confidently, assuring them that modern medicine could solve nearly anything. Tests were ordered, blood drawn, hormones measured. Weeks later, they returned for results. Dr. Balogan cleared his throat before speaking. "There are complications," he said carefully. "Mrs. Adewale's ovarian response is low." The word hung between them. Low. Not impossible, not final, just enough to plant fear. Seun nodded slowly, absorbing the information like a businessman studying risk. Mona asked questions, precise, informed ones. The doctor responded, but something in his tone shifted when Seun spoke. His eyes respected the billionaire more than the patient. Treatment began. Hormone injections, pills, timetables mapped to the minute. Mona followed instructions meticulously. She charted her cycles, monitored her body, prayed in quiet moments when no one watched. Months passed. Nothing happened. Mama Bisi's patience thinned visibly. During one dinner, she placed her fork down and said, "There are other options, son. Our family name cannot fade." Mona felt heat crawl up her neck. Mother Sun warned gently, but he did not contradict her. The second round of tests came with heavier words. Primary infertility, Dr. Balogan declared. It may be difficult for Mrs. Attawell to conceive naturally. May be difficult, but in the retelling it became, she cannot. The board began whispering too. Attawell Holdings was expanding aggressively into energy and infrastructure. Investors favored stability, succession plans, heirs predictability. Kunle Arogundade Seun's longtime friend and CFO began dropping subtle comments. Legacy builds confidence. Kunle remarked one evening over whiskey in Seun's study. Markets trust continuity. Seun stared into his glass. He loved Mona. He reminded himself of that. But love felt abstract compared to shareholder meetings and maternal pressure. It felt intangible against his mother's quiet disappointment and Kunle's strategic calculations. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Not overnight. Gradually. Seun stopped discussing treatment options in detail. He grew quiet during dinners. Mona noticed he avoided her gaze when Mama Bisi entered the room. One afternoon, Mona returned early from a charity meeting and found Mama Bisi in the living room speaking softly to someone on the phone. Yes, Mama Bisi said in Yoruba. We must be certain. The reports must not embarrass the family. Mona stepped inside. Mama Bisi ended the call immediately. Just checking on a cousin, she said smoothly. Mona nodded, but unease settled in her chest. The next clinic visit felt colder. Nurse and Chem avoided eye contact while preparing injections. Mona noticed a slight discrepancy in the dosage compared to her previous prescription. This seems higher, Mona said calmly. Dr. Balogan entered smiling too quickly. Adjustments are normal. She wanted to believe him. Weeks later, she found a folder, misplaced on the clinic counter while waiting alone. Her name was printed on the tab, but inside were 2 sets of hormone results. One marked normal range. The other circled in red, labeled diminished. Her heart pounded. Footsteps approached. The folder was swiftly taken from her hands. A clerical mix-up, the nurse muttered. That night, Mona lay awake beside her husband staring at the ceiling. Seun, she whispered. What if something is wrong with the reports? He turned toward her tired. Are you saying the doctor is lying? I'm saying we should double-check. He sighed, a sound edged with frustration. Mona, how many doctors do you want? We've done everything. Everything. Except question the narrative. The following month at Attawell Holdings' annual strategy dinner, an investor's wife approached Mona with a sympathetic smile. I hear it's been difficult for you, the woman said softly. Such a shame. Mona forced composure. Across the room, Seun was laughing with Kunle. For a moment, she wondered when the distance had grown so wide. Later that evening in their car, silence thickened between them. Do you think I wanted this? Mona asked quietly. Seun's jaw tightened. No one is blaming you, but they were. And he was beginning to listen. Back at the mansion in Ikoyi, Mama Bisi waited in the sitting room. There is a girl, she said without preamble, from a respectable family. She understands duty. Mona felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Seun did not immediately refuse. He did not immediately agree either, but his hesitation was louder than any decision. That night, Mona stood alone on the balcony overlooking Lagos's restless lights. She pressed her palm against her abdomen, not in hope, but in defiance. She was not empty. She was not broken. Yet the world around her was rearranging itself as if she were. Inside the house, conversations continued, quiet, strategic, merciless. And Mona realized something terrifying. The threat to her marriage was no longer medical, it was political. The first time Mona heard the word barren spoken without hesitation, it did not come from a doctor. It came from a housemaid who did not realize she was within earshot. She is beautiful, the girl whispered in Yoruba to another staff member in the corridor. But what is beauty without children? The words were not cruel, they were ordinary. That was what made them dangerous. Inside the Adewale mansion in Ikoyi, life continued with polished precision. The fountains ran. The gardeners trimmed hedges into perfect geometry. Meetings flowed in and out of the private study. Adewale Holdings had just secured a multi-billion naira energy contract in Port Harcourt. The press called Oluwaseun Adewale unstoppable. Yet inside the bedroom wing at the end of the marble corridor, silence stretched longer each night. Seun still came home. He still kissed Mona's forehead. But something had shifted in his gaze. There was calculation, now an invisible weighing of loss and gain. The second fertility cycle was more aggressive. Dr. Tade Balogun adjusted medications, introduced injections Mona had never heard of, and scheduled procedures with mechanical efficiency. He spoke mostly to Seun. "Your wife must remain calm," he would say. "Stress reduces probability." Probability. Mona sat upright in her chair during consultations, her back straight, her eyes steady. She asked questions about side effects, long-term risks, alternative assessments. Each time Dr. Balogun responded smoothly, but always redirected the final reassurance to Seun. Trust the process. The injections made Mona dizzy. Her heart raced unexpectedly at night. She woke drenched in sweat, gripping the sheets. When she mentioned it, the nurse assured her it was normal adjustment. One afternoon, while reviewing billing statements Seun had left on the dining table, Mona noticed a line item under the clinic's charges: specialized male analysis, confidential. Her pulse quickened. Seun had never mentioned undergoing testing. When he returned home that evening, she waited until they were alone. "You had tests done," she said quietly, sliding the document toward him. He glanced at it, then away. "Routine. Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't necessary." Her voice remained calm. "Were the results normal?" A pause. "Yes," he answered. Too quickly. Mona studied his face. She had once believed she knew every expression he carried. Now there were shadows she could not read. The following Sunday, Mama Bizi hosted a family luncheon. Extended relatives filled the compound with laughter and loud greetings. The aroma of fried plantain and spicy stew floated through the air. During the meal, Mama Bizi stood to speak. "Our family has been blessed with prosperity," she began. "But prosperity without continuity is fragile." Her eyes rested on Mona. "Some sacrifices must be made for legacy." The table grew quiet. Mona felt every gaze settle on her skin. She placed her fork down gently. "Legacy," she replied evenly, "is built on truth, not fear." A murmur passed through the guests. Mama Bissi's lips curved slightly. "And truth is what the doctor has already given us." Seun remained silent. That silence cracked something inside Mona, not loudly, but decisively. Days later, she returned alone to Dr. Balogun's clinic under the pretense of collecting updated prescriptions. Instead, she requested a full copy of her medical file. The receptionist hesitated. "It must be authorized by your husband," she said. "My body does not require authorization," Mona replied. Eventually, she was handed a thin folder, too thin. Entire lab reports were missing. Certain hormone levels, she remembered discussing, were absent. Dates did not align with her appointment history. As she flipped through the pages, Nurse Nkem appeared at the doorway, her expression tight. Madam Nkem whispered, once the hallway cleared, "Please be careful." Mona's breath caught. Careful of what Nkem swallowed. There are things that are not written. Before Mona could ask more, Dr. Balogun entered, smiling broadly. "Mrs. Adewale, you should not stress yourself like this." The folder was gently taken from her hands. That evening, Mona drove not home, but to a small independent laboratory in Surulere, recommended years ago by a colleague. She requested new tests, complete panels, no external communication. The technician barely recognized her without the escort of wealth. Results would take days. Those days stretched like wire, pulled too tight. At home, tension escalated. Seun spent longer hours at the office. Kunle began visiting more frequently, often closing the study doors behind them. When Mona approached, conversation stopped. One night, unable to endure uncertainty, she entered the study, unannounced. Kunle's expression flickered with annoyance. "We were discussing expansion into Ghana," he said casually. Mona's eyes drifted to the documents on the desk. She caught a glimpse of a familiar letterhead, Dr. Balogun's clinic. Soon quickly stacked the papers. "You should rest," he told her. Rest. As if exhaustion were the issue. 3 days later, the independent lab called. Mona sat alone in her car outside the facility as she opened the envelope. Her hormone levels were normal. Not low, not diminished. Normal. Her hands trembled, not with relief but with realization. If she was normal, then why had the clinic insisted otherwise? Another possibility surfaced, one she had pushed away for months. What if the problem had never been hers? That night she confronted Seun again. "I repeated the tests," she said, placing the new results before him. He scanned them briefly. "These are from some roadside lab," he dismissed. "It's accredited." Mona stopped chasing ghosts. Her voice hardened. "Then let us both retest together. Somewhere independent." His jaw tightened. "I will not subject myself to endless humiliation," he snapped. "Humiliation!" The word lingered. She studied him carefully. Fear flickered behind his anger. For the first time, Mona saw not a powerful billionaire, but a man terrified of exposure. The next morning, Mama Bisi summoned her. "You are creating unnecessary tension," Mama Bisi said, seated regally in the sunlit parlor. "A good wife protects her husband's pride." "And who protects mine?" Mona asked. Mama Bisi's gaze sharpened. "A woman's pride is in her home." Mona stood slowly. "And if the home is built on lies?" Mama Bisi did not answer. That evening, as Mona prepared for yet another injection, she examined the vial closely. The label seemed slightly altered, an adhesive overlay covering original print. Her stomach dropped. She placed the syringe down. For months she had been obedient, patient, cooperative. Now, clarity emerged. This was no longer about fertility. It was about control. And someone, whether doctor, friend, or family, had orchestrated a narrative that made her the convenient failure. Standing alone in the quiet bathroom, Mona looked at her reflection. She was not broken. She was being positioned. The empire around her glittered, but its foundation felt unstable. And somewhere behind polished smiles and medical jargon, a truth waited buried but breathing. The question was no longer whether she could conceive. The question was who needed her to believe she could not. The first time Mona refused an injection, the house felt it. Not because anyone saw her place the syringe back into its silver case, not because she announced it at dinner, but because something invisible shifted inside her, a quiet rebellion that altered the rhythm of obedience everyone had grown used to. For months, she had followed instructions, timed pills, charted temperatures, smiled through side effects, apologized for things she had not done. Now she waited. 3 days passed without the medication. Her body felt clearer. The racing heartbeat stopped. The dizziness eased. A fog she had not realized existed began to lift, and with clarity came anger. She scheduled another appointment at Dr. Tade Balogun's clinic, this time unannounced. The waiting area was quieter than usual. The walls displayed framed photographs of smiling babies, grateful parents posing beside plaques of appreciation. Success stories. When she was ushered into the consultation room, Dr. Balogun greeted her with the same rehearsed warmth. You must remain consistent with treatment, he began before she even sat down. Interruptions affect outcome. I did not interrupt, Mona replied calmly. I paused. His smile thinned slightly. That is not advisable. She placed her independent lab results on the desk again. These levels are normal, she said. He glanced at them barely. External labs do not use our calibrated equipment. You mean they don't use your narrative? His fingers tapped the table. Mrs. Attawale fertility is complex. So is deception. Silence. For a fraction of a second, irritation cracked through his polished demeanor. You are under stress, he said coolly. Stress distorts perception. She leaned forward. Then let us retest both partners in the same independent facility. Together. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he reached for her file and flipped it open, scanning pages as if searching for authority. Your husband has already undergone comprehensive evaluation, he said. His results were optimal. Then show them to me. A beat. They are confidential. My marriage is not. The air thickened. Footsteps approached outside the room. Nurse Nkem appeared briefly at the doorway, her eyes darting between them. Doctor, she whispered. Dr. Balogan stood. This discussion is unproductive, he concluded. Continue treatment. That is my professional recommendation. Mona gathered her papers, slowly. And I am withdrawing my consent, she said evenly. Outside the clinic, the Lagos sun burned harsh and bright. She inhaled deeply, letting the noise of traffic ground her. Something was wrong. Not uncertain wrong. Deliberate wrong. She drove directly to Attawale Holdings instead of home. In the executive wing, glass walls reflected power. Assistants moved quickly, tablets in hand. When she entered Seun's office without knocking, he looked up in surprise. We need to talk, she said. Kunle sat opposite him, mid-conversation. He rose smoothly. I'll give you privacy. Kunle offered, though. Irritation lingered in his tone. Once alone, Mona closed the door. I've stopped treatment, she said. Seun stared at her. What I will not continue until we retest together elsewhere. His chair creaked as he leaned back. This again. Yes, this again. He stood, frustration flashing across his face. You are embarrassing us. By asking for proof, by questioning professionals. By questioning lies. The word hung heavy between them. Seun's voice dropped. You think I would lie about something like this? I think someone is. He paced toward the window overlooking the city skyline. You are letting fear control you. No, she replied quietly. I am letting clarity guide me. He turned sharply. You are my wife, and I am not your scapegoat. The tension crackled like exposed wire. For the first time, Seun did not argue further. Instead, he dismissed her with a tired wave. I don't have time for this. Time, the one thing he seemed unwilling to give. That evening, Mama Bisi summoned Mona again. You are destabilizing my son, she said without greeting. A wife supports. A wife deserves truth. Mama Bisi's gaze sharpened. You are forgetting your place. My place is not beneath a lie. The older woman rose slowly, authority radiating from her posture. You came into this family from outside, she reminded her. We gave you status, protection, influence, and I gave you loyalty, Mona answered. Mama Bisi's expression hardened. Legacy requires sacrifice. Mona held her gaze. Whose sacrifice? There was no response. Later that night, Mona walked past the study and heard raised voices inside. Kunle's voice, low urgent. This is getting complicated, Seun replied sharply. Handle it. Handle what Mona's chest tightened. The next morning, an envelope arrived at the mansion delivered privately, not through official channels. Inside were photocopies of medical documents, anonymous, her name at the top, altered hormone readings highlighted. Beneath them, faint, but visible, the original numbers normal. Attached was a handwritten note. "They are protecting someone." Her hands trembled. Protecting someone. Her mind raced. If her results had been manipulated, then whose were they hiding? She drove again to the independent lab in Surulere and requested a comprehensive male fertility analysis kit, anonymous collection permitted. When she returned home, she placed it on the bathroom counter. Seon found it that evening. His reaction was immediate. "Are you serious?" he demanded. "Yes, you are insulting me. I am protecting myself." He stared at the box as if it were an accusation made flesh. "I will not participate in this circus." She met his eyes steadily. "Then you have your answer." The words struck him harder than she expected. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across his face, followed by anger. He swept the kit into the trash. Enough. Something inside Mona snapped, not loudly, but permanently. She retrieved the box from the bin, wiped it clean, and placed it in her handbag. "Whether you participate or not," she said softly, "the truth exists." That night she did not sleep beside him. Instead, she sat alone in the guest room reviewing the anonymous documents again and again. The altered numbers were subtle, adjusted just enough to shift diagnosis. Someone had rewritten her medical reality, and everyone around her doctor friend mother-in-law had benefited from that narrative. If she was labeled infertile, pressure shifted away from other possibilities. If she was the problem, the empire remained intact, and if Seon's own results were compromised. Her breath caught. She remembered the billing line item, specialized male analysis, confidential. What if those results had not been optimal? What if humiliation had been redirected carefully, deliberately onto her? The next morning she contacted a lawyer quietly, discreetly. Not to file for divorce, not yet, but to secure copies of every financial transaction between Adawale Holdings and Dr. Balogun's clinic. If manipulation existed, it would leave a trail, and Mona was no longer afraid to follow it. As she stood at the balcony once more overlooking Lagos's restless horizon, she felt something unfamiliar rise inside her. Not despair, not fear, resolve. They had underestimated her. They had assumed she would absorb blame indefinitely. They had mistaken patience for weakness. But truth had a way of surfacing slowly, stubbornly, and Mona El Sayed was done being the silent casualty of someone else's pride. What she did not yet know was how far they were willing to go to keep that pride protected. The night Adewale Holdings celebrated 20 years of dominance, Mona El Sayed wore gold. Not for vanity, for armor. The ballroom at the Echo Convention Center shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Investors from London, Dubai, and Johannesburg filled the round tables. Politicians lingered near the stage. Cameras flashed as though history itself were being documented. At the center stood Oluwaseun Adewale, tailored tuxedo, steady smile, the embodiment of success. And beside him, Mona. Graceful, silent, watching. For weeks, tension had coiled inside their home like a tightening rope. Conversations ended abruptly when she entered rooms. Legal inquiries she had discreetly initiated had begun uncovering financial ties between Adawale Holdings and Dr. Tade Balogun's clinic, consultancy fees disguised as research sponsorships. She had not yet confronted Seon with that evidence. Tonight was not meant for confrontation, or so she believed. The orchestra quieted as Seon stepped to the podium. Applause erupted. He spoke about growth, innovation, national pride. He thanked partners, praised his board, honored his mother seated in the front row like royalty. Then his tone shifted. An empire, he said smoothly, must think about tomorrow, about continuity, about legacy. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Mona felt her stomach tighten. "We invest in infrastructure," he continued, "in technology, in energy, but the most important investment is in the future we leave behind. He paused. His eyes flickered toward her just long enough, and sometimes he added voice-cool, hard decisions must be made to secure that future. The room stilled. Mama Bisi watched closely, expression unreadable. Seun inhaled. My wife and I, he said, have faced personal challenges. Despite extensive effort, we have been unable to produce an heir. The word struck Mona like glass, shattering inside her chest. Unable. Produce. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some faces softened with pity. Others sharpened with curiosity. Seun continued. As a leader, I cannot allow personal limitations to endanger what thousands depend on. Therefore, I have made the decision to restructure my family future, as I have restructured my company strategically. Gasps whispered across the hall. Mona stood frozen. He had not told her this. Security personnel discreetly positioned near the stage began moving closer. I will be seeking dissolution of this marriage, Seun concluded calmly. Effective immediately. The applause did not come this time, only stunned silence. Mona felt heat rush to her ears. For a split second she considered speaking, exposing the documents, the altered results, the manipulated truth. But she saw the cameras, the shareholders, the narrative already forming. She refused to unravel publicly. Instead, she stepped back from the podium. Security approached, not aggressively, but unmistakably. Ma'am, one whispered. The humiliation was surgical. Guided down the stage steps, through tables of watching elites, past Mama Bisi, who did not rise. As Mona reached the ballroom doors, Kunle appeared at her side. This doesn't have to be messy, he murmured. Sign quietly. It protects everyone. Everyone, she asked softly. Reputation is fragile. So is truth, she replied. Outside, the Lagos night pulsed with traffic and distant music. The valet avoided eye contact as her car was brought forward. Rain did not fall. There was no dramatic storm. Only the sharp brightness of city lights reflecting off polished marble steps. Her heels clicked once, then stopped. She removed them. Barefoot, she walked toward the waiting car. Inside the ballroom, applause finally resumed, hesitant at first, then stronger as Seun pivoted back to corporate achievements. The machine moved forward, as if she had never existed. At the mansion later that night, her belongings were already being packed, efficient, clinical. Mama Bisi stood in the hallway overseeing staff. This is for the best, she said coolly. A woman must know when she has failed. Mona faced her. I did not fail. Mama Bisi's lips curved faintly. History will not remember that distinction. History remembers truth, Mona answered. Truth, Mama Bisi said, belongs to those in power. Mona's gaze did not waver. Not forever. Seun remained in his study while she gathered her remaining personal items. Documents, photographs, a framed picture from their early days in Dubai when laughter had been effortless. She paused at the doorway of his office. He did not look up immediately. When he did, his expression was rigid, controlled, but not calm. You forced my hand, he said. I asked for honesty. You embarrassed me. I asked for proof. His voice sharpened. You made this public by challenging my authority. I protected myself, she replied. Silence thickened. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered across his features, but pride buried it. You will be compensated, he said finally. Generously. I am not a severance package. He looked away. Security escorted her to the gates just after midnight. No press remained, no witnesses, only the distant hum of Lagos nightlife. As the gates closed behind her, Mona did not cry. Not because she felt nothing, but because grief required energy she could not spare. Instead, she opened her handbag and touched the envelope containing altered medical reports. Proof. Not yet public, but real. Her phone vibrated. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A trembling voice spoke. It's Nkem, the nurse whispered. They know you've been asking questions. Mona's pulse quickened. What do they know that you contacted a lawyer? Cold spread through her veins. How there are eyes everywhere, Nkem said. Urgently. Please. Leave Lagos. They will protect the reputation. At any cost. The line went dead. Mona stared through the windshield at the city skyline she had once called home. Protect the reputation. At any cost. The cost had been her dignity, her marriage, her name. But if they were afraid, it meant she was close to something dangerous. She drove not toward a hotel, but toward the airport. Before dawn, she boarded a flight to Abuja, with only one suitcase and a folder of evidence. As the plane lifted off, Lagos shrank beneath her. She pressed her palm against her abdomen again, not in hope this time, but in silent promise. They had declared her barren, disposable, replaceable. But they had underestimated the one thing she still possessed. Truth. And truth, once carried long enough, becomes a weapon. 15 years later, when she would walk back through those same glass doors, she would not come alone. But for now she was simply a woman leaving everything behind. Not defeated, not broken, only beginning. Abuja did not welcome Mona El Sayed with comfort. It received her with indifference. The city was quieter than Lagos, less theatrical in its ambition. Government buildings stood solid and distant. The air felt drier, more anonymous. For the first time in 15 years, Mona rented a room under her own name. No Adewale, no corporate affiliation. Just Mona El Sayed. The apartment was small one-bedroom, cream walls, iron balcony rails overlooking a dusty street where hawkers sold roasted corn in the evenings. It was not luxury, it was freedom. The first nights were the hardest. Silence in the room felt unfamiliar without the hum of central air conditioning or distant staff movement. She lay awake, replaying the gala in her mind, the word dissolution, echoing against chandeliers, the calculated calm in Seun's voice. She did not allow herself to cry. Long. Grief, she understood, was a phase. Survival required planning. By the end of the first week, she secured a short-term consulting role with a mid-sized logistics company, expanding trade routes between Abuja and Accra. Her background in supply chain analytics skills she had once used to strengthen Adewale Holdings remained sharp. Her employer, a Ghanaian woman named Abena Owusu, did not ask about her past. She asked about efficiency ratios. Mona appreciated that. Work steadied her. But the questions about her body remained unanswered. 2 weeks after settling in, she contacted a private OBGYN in Abuja, recommended discreetly, through professional networks, Dr. Ifunanya Mensah. Unlike Dr. Balogun's marble-heavy clinic, Dr. Mensah's office was modest but warm. Bookshelves lined the walls, certificates hung without excessive framing. During the consultation, Dr. Mensah listened, truly listened. She read through Mona's independent lab results, then reviewed copies of the altered documents Mona had brought. These inconsistencies are not minor, Dr. Mensah said quietly. They are deliberate. Mona's breath caught. So I am not infertile. Dr. Mensah met her eyes steadily. There is no medical evidence here suggesting permanent infertility. The room felt suddenly larger. What about the medications? Mona asked. Dr. Mensah's expression darkened. These dosages, she said, pointing at the treatment logs, can suppress ovulation if mismanaged. Suppress, not stimulate. Mona felt cold spread through her spine. They told me it would help. It can, Dr. Mensah replied carefully, but not in the amounts you were given. Mona closed her eyes briefly. They were preventing pregnancy, she whispered. Dr. Mensah did not immediately confirm, but she did not deny it. Why? Mona asked. The doctor's voice softened. That is not a medical question. Mona understood. Someone had needed her to remain childless. Someone had needed a narrative. When she left the clinic that afternoon, Abuha's sunlight seemed sharper. She sat inside her car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, absorbing what she now knew. She had not failed biologically. She had been positioned politically. Her phone buzzed. A message from her lawyer in Lagos. Financial links confirmed between Adewale Holdings and Balogun Clinic. Unusual consulting transfers. Further investigation risky. Risky. The word did not frighten her, but it clarified something. This was no longer about proving her fertility. It was about proving manipulation. Weeks turned into months. Mona focused on rebuilding. Her consulting work expanded into a partnership. She began traveling periodically to Accra, strengthening trade routes between Ghana and Nigeria. Abena valued her precision and discipline. "You work like someone who has lost something," Abena remarked once over coffee. "I have," Mona replied. "But you are not broken," No, Mona said quietly. "I am recalibrating." One evening, nearly 6 months after leaving Lagos, Mona noticed a change in her body. Fatigue, mild nausea. She dismissed it initially as travel strain. But when her cycle failed to arrive, unease returned, not fear this time, but cautious awareness. She scheduled another appointment with Dr. Mensah. Blood was drawn. Tests were run. Mona waited in the consultation room, heart steady but guarded. Dr. Mensah entered with a slow smile. "You are pregnant," she said gently. The words did not explode. They settled. Mona inhaled sharply. How certain, very. Tears welled in her eyes, not dramatic sobs but quiet release. She pressed her palm against her abdomen again. This time, hope felt different, not desperate, earned. "Is it stable?" she asked. "We will monitor carefully," Dr. Mensah replied. "Given previous hormonal suppression, we proceed cautiously." As weeks passed, ultrasounds revealed something unexpected. Then, astonishing. "There are 3 heartbeats," Dr. Mensah said, pointing at the monitor. Mona stared at the screen. 3. Triplets. Her breath trembled. Life had multiplied where she had once been declared empty. The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness intensified. Blood pressure fluctuated. Bed rest became necessary by the 2nd trimester. Abena insisted she step back from travel, converting her partnership into a silent equity share so Mona could focus on health. "You will return stronger," Abena assured her. Mona learned patience in a new way, counting kicks instead of calendar meetings. At night, she lay awake in her small Abuja apartment, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing and imagining the future. She did not think of Sion often. When she did, it was not with longing, but with clarity. He had chosen pride over partnership, power over truth. Now life was growing without him. In the 7th month, complications arose. Preterm contractions, emergency monitoring, hospital corridors once again, but this time without deception. Dr. Mensah remained calm, steady. "We will do everything we can." Mona prayed not for vindication, not for revenge, for survival. The boys were born early, small, fragile. 3 incubators lined in a row. Yasin, Zaid, Rayyan. She named them alone. There was no grand celebration, no cameras, no legacy speech, only the steady beep of machines and the fierce determination of a mother who had been told she could not. Weeks in neonatal care tested her endurance more than humiliation ever had. She spoke to them softly through incubator glass. "You were never impossible," she whispered. One by one they gained strength. Weight increased. Breathing stabilized. When Mona finally carried them home, 3 small bundles wrapped in white blankets, Abuha felt warmer. Her apartment was too small for 3 cribs, but it held something far greater than luxury. Truth. Years later, when people would look at those boys and see resemblance, symmetry, inheritance, they would not know the cost at which they arrived. But Mona would. And somewhere far away in Lagos, an empire continued to function, unaware that the narrative it had built was already unraveling quietly. Because the woman it had cast out as barren was now a mother of 3, and the future it had tried to control had found its own way into existence. The first year with Triplets did not feel miraculous. It felt exhausting. Sleep came in fragments, 20 minutes here, 40 there. Bottles lined the kitchen counter beside unopened legal folders. Mona moved through days in a rhythm of feeding, sterilizing, rocking, whispering. Yasin cried the loudest. Zaid stared longest. Rayyan clung tightest. 3 distinct personalities emerging from the same fragile beginning. Her Abuja apartment could no longer contain them comfortably. With Abena's insistence and financial partnership support, Mona relocated to Accra, Ghana, where her expanding logistics consultancy had begun generating stable returns. Accra did not know her past. She introduced herself simply as Mona El Sayed, supply chain strategist and mother of 3. No one asked about Lagos. No one asked about divorce. In Accra, she rebuilt deliberately. She reinvested her settlement funds not lavishly, not recklessly, but strategically. She partnered with small trucking cooperatives, moving goods between Temaport and inland markets. She negotiated fuel contracts, optimized route planning, implemented digital tracking systems. Within 3 years, El Sayed Logistics Solutions became profitable. Not flashy, but resilient. Her office overlooked a modest industrial yard where drivers respected her because she paid on time and demanded integrity. At home, the boys grew. They learned to walk in sequence like a small, coordinated rebellion against gravity. They spoke in overlapping sentences, finishing one another's thoughts. As toddlers, they often lined up in front of her, identical brown eyes fixed upward, waiting for instruction. Discipline, she would tell them gently, is freedom. They did not yet understand. But they would. When the boys turned 5, Mona made a decision that surprised even her. She stopped pursuing legal exposure against Dr. Balogun and Adawale Holdings. Her lawyer in Lagos had continued updating her discreetly. Evidence was strong but dangerous. Financial trails pointed toward high-level involvement. Witnesses were reluctant. You could win, the lawyer said over an encrypted call, but it would be messy. Messy meant public. Messy meant headlines. Messy meant her son's names attached to scandal. Mona had to choose. Justice now or peace first. She chose peace, not because she forgave, but because revenge would consume the very stability she was building. Instead, she focused on documentation, quietly storing every altered report, every suspicious transfer, every correspondence. A file labeled simply truth. If the day came when truth needed to surface, she would be prepared, but not at the expense of her son's childhood. Years passed. The boys entered school in Accra, bright uniforms, polished shoes, 3 backpacks swinging in unison. Teachers noticed quickly. "They're unusually sharp," one said during a parent meeting. Mathematics especially. Mona smiled faintly. She saw it too, the analytical instinct, the precise questioning. They inherited more than her resilience. They inherited something else. By age 10, the questions began. "Why don't we have a father?" Rayyan asked one evening. Mona did not lie. "You do have a father," she said carefully. "But sometimes adults make decisions that separate paths. Is he dead?" Yasin pressed. "No. Does he know about us?" Zaid asked quietly. Mona paused. "He will." It was not a promise of reconciliation. It was a promise of inevitability. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Oluwaseun Adewale's empire expanded further into renewable energy and telecommunications. His face appeared on magazine covers. Awards lined his office walls. But his personal life remained conspicuously hollow. The young woman Mama Bisi had once suggested as replacement wife lasted less than a year. Subsequent relationships ended quietly. Rumors circulated about failed engagements, What investors did not know was that Seon had undergone additional fertility testing years after Mona left. Privately, the results had not been optimal. Temporary hormonal imbalance, reduced motility, treatable, but not during the period Mona had been undergoing suppression therapy. The irony had been brutal. He had confronted Dr. Balogun once behind closed doors. "You assured me," Seon had said coldly. Dr. Balogun responded with carefully layered explanations, stress factors, fluctuating markers, inconclusive early data. But Seon never fully trusted him again. Still, he did nothing publicly, because acknowledging manipulation would expose his own complicity. Pride preserved silence. Back in Accra, Mona's company grew steadily. By the time the boys turned 13, El Sayed Logistics managed cross-border shipments between Ghana, Nigeria, and Côte d'Ivoire. Her name began circulating in West African trade circles, not loudly, but respectfully. One afternoon, while reviewing a new port contract proposal, Mona froze. The client listed under partnership development was Adawale Energy Infrastructure. Her breath slowed. 15 years, and now their business paths intersected. She instructed her assistant to gather details discreetly. The proposal aimed to establish new transport routes between Lagos and Accra. Adawale Holdings required a regional logistics partner. Mona understood the strategic importance. She also understood the symbolism. Fate rarely announces itself. It aligns quietly. That evening at dinner, Yasin mentioned something casually. "Our history teacher talked about Nigerian billionaires today," he said. "One named Adawale." Mona's fork paused midair. "What did he say?" she asked evenly. "That he built everything from nothing." Zaid looked up from his plate. "Is that our father's name?" Mona exhaled slowly. "Yes." Silence settled at the table. Ryan spoke next. "Does he know about us?" "Not yet. Will he be angry?" She met their identical gazes. "Truth does not cause anger," she said gently. "Pride does." They absorbed that quietly. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Mona opened the old folder labeled Truth. The paper edges had yellowed slightly. Medical alterations, financial links, anonymous warnings. Every page represented a chapter she had survived. Now business, not revenge, was drawing her back toward Lagos. The difference was power. She would not return as a discarded wife. She would return as a regional logistics partner negotiating terms. She would not stand beside him as silent ornament. She would sit across from him at a conference table. Equal. The next morning, she instructed her legal team to accept preliminary talks with Adawale Holdings. Professional only. No personal disclosures. Yet, as the official email confirmation was sent, Mona felt something she had not felt in years. Not fear, not anger, anticipation. Because the boys were 15 now, tall, sharp, undeniably, bearing the same controlled posture Seon carried during press conferences. The resemblance had grown undeniable, and soon proximity would make it impossible to ignore. Across the Gulf of Guinea in a glass tower overlooking Lagos Island, Oluwaseun Adewale reviewed a briefing document for potential logistics partners. His assistant summarized key profiles: strong regional expansion, disciplined cost control, founder background international. He skimmed until a name stopped him. El Sayed Logistics Solutions, founder Mona El Sayed. His hand stilled. 15 years dissolved into a single heartbeat. He told himself it was coincidence. West Africa was small. Names traveled. Still, he requested the full profile. As her professional photograph appeared on the screen, older, steadier, unbroken Sun felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his composure. Regret. He did not yet know that she would not come alone. But the narrative he had declared complete 15 years earlier was about to reopen, and this time he would not control the script. When the official invitation arrived, it came through formal channels. Subject line: Strategic Logistics Partnership Meeting, Lagos Headquarters, Sender Office of the CEO Adewale Holdings. Mona read it twice before responding. Professional language, no personal acknowledgement, no hint of recognition. She closed her laptop slowly. The boys were at the dining table behind her textbooks, spread out in practiced order. Yasin was solving advanced algebra problems beyond his grade level. Zaid was sketching a bridge structure from memory after watching a documentary. Rayyan was reading a biography of African entrepreneurs. They looked up at her in synchronized curiosity. "Is it about Nigeria?" Yasin asked. "Yes," Mona answered calmly. "Are we going?" Rayyan pressed. She paused. "Yes." Silence followed. Not fear, not excitement, something deeper. By 15, the boys no longer needed fairy tale explanations. Mona had prepared them gradually over the years, never poisoning them with bitterness, never hiding reality either. "Your father is a powerful man," she told them that evening as they sat together in the living room. "Power does not make someone evil, but pride can make them blind." "Did he know you weren't infertile?" Zaid asked. "I believe he chose not to question what benefited him." Rayyan leaned forward. "Will he deny us?" Mona held his gaze. "He can deny words. He cannot deny truth." They nodded slowly. The trip to Lagos was arranged under the guise of a business visit. Mona did not alert the media. She did not seek drama. She prepared documentation contracts, projections, negotiation terms. And quietly, she arranged something else. Private DNA sample kits, not for confrontation, for certainty. When their plane descended over Lagos, 15 years after she had fled before dawn, Mona felt no trembling, only awareness. The city had grown taller. Bridges stretched wider. Billboards glowed brighter. But the skyline still carried the same restless energy. At Murtala Muhammad International Airport, a car from Adewale Holdings awaited them. Black SUV uniformed driver. The boys observed everything silently. The driver addressed her formally. "Mrs. El Sayed," not Adewale. She appreciated that. As they drove through Victoria Island toward the headquarters tower, Mona watched her son's reflections in the window. 3 identical faces. 3 living contradictions to a lie, once broadcast under chandeliers. Inside the glass tower lobby, reception staff stood straighter when Mona entered. Her name had been registered. She signed in. Then it happened. From across the polished floor, a familiar figure emerged from a private elevator. Oluwaseun Adewale. Older, sharper lines at the edges of his mouth, authority still intact. His stride slowed as his eyes settled on her. For a second, 15 years collapsed into a single unspoken memory. Then his gaze shifted. To the boys. Time fractured. Yasin stood slightly ahead of his brother's posture straight. Zaid's chin tilted upward in quiet defiance. Rayyan's eyes scanned the space analytically. Siyun's breath faltered. The resemblance was undeniable. Not subtle, not imagined. Undeniable. "Mona," he said, voice controlled but strained. "Mr. Adewale," she replied evenly. The boys remained silent. Siyun's eyes moved between them again. "Your sons?" he asked carefully. "Yes." A beat of silence expanded. "They are impressive. They are disciplined." His jaw tightened. An assistant approached cautiously. "Sir, the board is ready." Siyun did not move immediately. Instead, he extended a hand toward Mona. "Shall we?" She did not take his hand. She walked beside him. The boardroom doors opened. Executives rose slightly at their entrance. Among them sat Kunle Arogundade, older, heavier, but still calculating. His expression shifted when he saw the boys. He masked it quickly. The meeting began with standard formalities, market projections, fuel stabilization strategies, cross-border tariff negotiations. Mona presented with clarity and precision. She spoke not as a former wife, but as a regional logistics authority. The boys sat quietly at the back of the room, observing. At one point, Sewun's voice faltered mid-sentence as Yasin adjusted his posture, exactly as he once had during investor briefings. A mirror. Kunle noticed too. His eyes narrowed slightly. After the presentation concluded, the board approved preliminary partnership discussions. Professional success. But the air held something unresolved. As executives exited, Sewun remained. "Mona," he said quietly, "stay." She nodded to the boys. "Wait outside." They obeyed without question. Once alone in the boardroom, silence thickened. Sewun moved toward the window overlooking Lagos Lagoon. "They look like me," he said without turning. "Yes." He faced her. "Are they mine?" Mona did not answer immediately. Instead, she placed a small sealed envelope on the table. "Evidence exists," she said calmly, "but I prefer clarity over speculation." He stared at the envelope. "What is this? An opportunity?" His voice lowered. "You're certain I have never been uncertain?" A long pause followed. 15 years of pride stood between them. "You disappeared," he said finally. "I was removed. You never told me about them. You declared me incapable." His eyes closed briefly. "I acted based on medical reports funded by your own transfers." The accusation landed cleanly. His head lifted sharply. "What are you implying? I am stating facts." She stepped closer. "You were tested," she continued. "You had hormonal imbalance during that period. Temporary, treatable. But someone ensured that truth did not reach you." He went still. "I confronted Balogun years ago," he admitted quietly. He denied manipulation. "And you chose not to dig deeper." He did not argue, because he knew she was right. From the hallway, faint echoes of the boys' laughter drifted in brief, unaware. Sewun's composure cracked slightly. "Why now?" he asked. "Because they deserve acknowledgement," she said simply. He walked toward the boardroom door, then stopped. "Does my mother know Numabur and Kunle?" He suspected something. That was enough. Sewun exhaled slowly. 15 years ago, he had believed dissolving a marriage was strategic. Today, strategy felt small. "They are 15, he asked. "Yes." He nodded faintly. "Let me see them again." Mona opened the door. The boys entered. Sewun stood before them, no speech prepared. Yasin met his gaze directly. Zaid crossed his arms. Rayyan studied him quietly. "I am Oluwaseun Adewale," he said finally. "We know," Yasin replied. "No hostility, no reverence, just fact." Sewun swallowed. "I would like to confirm biologically." Mona stepped forward. "That can be arranged." Kunle appeared at the end of the corridor, unexpectedly watching. His expression was not one of surprise. It was calculation. Because if the triplets were confirmed as legitimate heirs, power structures within Adewale Holdings would shift permanently. Mama Bisi's long-protected narrative would collapse. Financial manipulations tied to Balogun Clinic could resurface. Legacy would no longer be theoretical. It would have faces. As Mona led her sons toward the private testing suite she had prearranged quietly through an independent laboratory in Lagos, she felt neither triumph nor revenge, only inevitability. Truth had been patient. Now it stood in a glass tower overlooking the city that once discarded her. And for the first time, Oluwaseun Adewale felt something more powerful than pride. Fear. Because if the results confirmed what his eyes already saw, the empire he built on silence would face a reckoning far greater than a board vote. And somewhere inside the building, unseen but alert, Kunle began making calls. The DNA results were scheduled to take 72 hours. 72 hours felt longer than 15 years. Mona refused to remain inside Adewale Holdings during that time. She booked a suite at a quiet hotel on Victoria Island overlooking the Atlantic. The boys had never seen Lagos from above before. They stood by the window that first night watching headlights thread through the city like restless veins. "It's louder than Accra," Ryan observed. "It's always been loud," Mona replied. Yasin turned toward her. "Are you nervous?" She considered the question honestly. "I am prepared," she said. Preparation, she had learned, was stronger than fear. Across the city, Oluwaseun Adewale did not sleep. He remained in his study long after midnight, reviewing documents he had ignored years earlier. Old medical correspondence, internal transfer approvals, consultancy contracts with Dr. Tade Balogun's clinic. The numbers now looked different. He noticed patterns he had once dismissed as administrative convenience monthly retainers, disguised as fertility research grants. He noticed Kunle's digital signature, authorizing disbursements. His chest tightened. At 2:14 a.m., he called Kunle. "Come in tomorrow," Seun said coldly. "Early." The following morning, Mama Bisi arrived at the headquarters unannounced. She had already heard. Powerful families always heard. "I saw her," she said sharply, entering Seun's office without waiting. "And the boys." Seun did not deny it. "They are likely mine," he said. Mama Bisi stiffened. "Impossible. Biology is not political, mother." Her voice dropped dangerously low. "That woman seeks leverage. She brought evidence. And you believe her," Mama Bisi demanded. He met her gaze steadily. "I believe my eyes." For the first time in years, doubt flickered across Mama Bisi's composure. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Mona received an anonymous message. "Be careful. The stakes are higher than legacy." She did not respond. Instead, she contacted her legal team and arranged secure custody of the DNA results once available. Copies would be stored in Accra and Abuja simultaneously. No more vulnerabilities. On the second evening, Seun requested to see the boys again, informally. Mona agreed under one condition: neutral location. They met at a quiet private dining room overlooking the marina. Seun arrived without security. The boys studied him openly this time. "You run power plants," Zaid said, matter-of-factly. "Yes." "Do you ever visit the communities you power?" Ryan asked. Seun blinked. "Sometimes." Yasin leaned forward. "Did you believe our mother couldn't have us?" The question landed without malice, just precision. Seun inhaled slowly. "Yes," he admitted. Why Zaid pressed. "Because I trusted the wrong people." The boys exchanged glances. Mona watched silently. Ryan spoke next. "Will you trust differently now?" The simplicity of the question unsettled him more than accusation would have. "I am trying to," he said. That night, for the first time, Seun felt something unfamiliar in their presence, not threat, reflection. On the morning of the third day, the independent laboratory called. Results were ready. Mona insisted they be delivered directly to her hotel suite in sealed form. Seun arrived shortly after, face composed but pale. The envelope sat on the table between them. No cameras, no board, no lawyers in the room. Only 4 adults and 3 boys standing at the edge of truth. Mona handed the envelope to Seun. "You open it," she said. His fingers hesitated briefly before breaking the seal. The pages unfolded slowly. He scanned the first line, then the second, then stopped. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. The room fell silent. Yasin watched his father's face carefully. Zaid exhaled softly. Rayyan's shoulders straightened. Seun lowered the pages. "They are my sons," he said quietly. Not to the world, to himself. Mona felt no rush of victory, only release. The boys remained still. Finally, Yasin spoke. "So what happens now?" Seun looked at Mona first. Not the board. Not his mother. Her. "What do you want?" he asked her. "I want acknowledgement," she replied. "Legal recognition, emotional accountability, and protection for them from corporate politics. He nodded slowly. You will have it. But outside that room, forces were already moving. Kunle had not waited for confirmation. He had begun contacting board members quietly, framing the situation as a potential destabilizing event. Investors disliked unpredictability. If 3 previously unknown heirs emerged, questions about past decisions would surface, and if investigations reopened around Belogan Clinic, financial irregularities could expose more than medical fraud. Mama Bisi also moved quickly. She summoned a private family council. This is a trap, she insisted to senior relatives. She wants to control inheritance. But whispers had already begun circulating beyond family walls. Staff inside Adawale Holdings had seen the boys. They had noticed the resemblance. Truth spreads faster than strategy. That afternoon, Soon convened an emergency board meeting. Mona did not attend. She remained at the hotel with her sons, discussing what recognition meant. "Does this mean we move here?" Ryan asked. "No," Mona said firmly. "Your life remains yours. Will he be in it?" Zaid asked. "That depends on him." Yasin looked thoughtful. "If he chooses pride again, we don't beg," he said. Mona smiled faintly. "Exactly." At the boardroom table, Seun faced his executives. "I have 3 sons," he announced. Shock rippled through the room. "They will be legally recognized." Kunle's voice cut in carefully. "With respect, this changes succession planning dramatically." "Yes," Seun replied evenly. "It corrects it." Kunle leaned back, and the circumstances of their absence, Seun's eyes hardened. "We will investigate." The weight of those words shifted the air. For the first time, Kunle felt uncertainty. After the meeting, Seun called Mona. "It begins," he said. "Be certain," she replied. "I am." But beneath corporate declarations, something deeper stirred. Because recognition was only the surface. The real reckoning lay in exposing how the narrative of barrenness had been constructed. And those responsible would not surrender quietly. As Mona tucked her sons into their separate hotel beds that night, she understood something clearly. The hardest part was not proving paternity. It was proving intent. Who altered the reports, who authorized suppression, who benefited, and how far would they go to protect themselves now that heirs existed? Outside, Lagos roared as it always had. But inside the Adwale Empire, the foundation had cracked. Not from scandal, from truth. And truth, once acknowledged, demands justice. Recognition did not bring peace. It brought exposure. Within 48 hours of the DNA confirmation, news began circulating not through official press releases, but through whispers that leaked into digital tabloids and business forums. Adawale heirs revealed after 15-year silence. Former wife returns with triplets. Speculation replaced certainty. Comment sections filled with opinions from strangers who believed they understood private pain. Mona kept the boys away from television. But they were 15. They had phones. Yasin showed her a headline one evening. "Should we respond?" he asked. "No," she said calmly. "Noise fades. Truth stays." Across town at Adawale Holdings' stock fluctuated slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to irritate investors. Seun convened another closed-door board meeting. "This must be controlled," Kunle insisted. "If medical fraud is implied, regulators may step in." "Let them," Seun replied. Kunle's gaze sharpened. "You are willing to risk the company. I am unwilling to risk my sons." The shift was subtle but undeniable. For the first time in years, Seun was not prioritizing optics. He requested a full forensic audit of all medical consultancy payments between Adawale Holdings and Dr. Tade Belogan's clinic. Internal compliance officers began combing through archived records. Patterns emerged quickly. Monthly transfers labeled Research Partnership. Side contracts signed under Kunle's authority. Irregular adjustments coinciding with Mona's treatment timeline. When confronted privately, Kunle remained composed. These were standard strategic contributions, he argued. Fertility innovation supports corporate wellness branding. "Do not insult my intelligence," Seun said coldly. Kunle's voice lowered. "You made decisions based on the information provided. No one forced you." The statement was accurate and brutal. Seun had chosen pride, but someone had curated the lie. Meanwhile, Mona agreed to one carefully structured press statement, brief and measured. Standing outside the Lagos High Court building, she spoke without emotion. "My sons deserve acknowledgement and protection. This is not a revenge narrative. It is a correction of record." She declined further questions. Back at the hotel, Ryan asked quietly, "Why didn't you say more?" "Because the goal is justice," she answered, "not spectacle." Behind the scenes, Dr. Balogan sensed pressure tightening. Regulatory inquiries began reaching his clinic. Patient files were requested. Digital backups were reviewed. One nurse, Nkem Obi, received a subpoena. She called Mona late that night. "They want me to testify," Nkem whispered. "Will you?" Mona asked. A long pause. "I altered reports," Nkem admitted. "Under instruction, from whom Dr. Balogan said it came from above, that the husband must not appear compromised." Mona's breath slowed. "Are you prepared to say that publicly?" "I am afraid." "So was I," Mona replied softly. "Until I realized silence protects the wrong people." The next morning, Mama Bisi requested a private meeting with Mona. They met in a quiet conference room inside the headquarters. Mama Bisi entered without greeting. "You have achieved what you wanted," she said. "Why continue digging?" Mona remained seated. "Because the lie cost 15 years. Mama Bisi's voice hardened. "Every powerful family protects its name." "By sacrificing truth?" Mona asked. "By preserving stability. Stability built on deception collapses eventually." Mama Bisi leaned forward. "You were an outsider. You did not understand how fragile legacy is." "I understood partnership," Mona replied calmly. "Your son abandoned it." Silence stretched. For the first time, the older woman's certainty wavered, even if there was manipulation. Mama Bisi said quietly, "Seun still chose." "Yes," Mona agreed, "and he will live with that choice." Later that day, Seun visited the boys alone. They met at a neutral office lounge overlooking the marina. He did not come as CEO. He came without entourage. "I am reopening the medical investigation," he told them. Yasin crossed his arms slightly. "Does that fix what happened?" "No," Seun admitted. "Then why?" Zaid asked. "Because you deserve the truth about your mother's name." Ryan studied him carefully. "Will you expose your friend?" he asked. If 15 years ago someone had predicted that a teenage boy would corner Oluwaseun Adewale with moral clarity, he would have laughed. Now, he did not. "Yes," he said quietly. Within days, regulators froze portions of Dr. Balogan's clinic operations pending investigation. Financial forensics linked specific altered lab entries to external payment triggers. Digital signatures traced back to internal approvals under Kunle's authorization. The narrative shifted. This was no longer about a marriage. It was about medical fraud and corporate interference. Kunle called Seun one last time. "You are destroying everything," he warned. "No," Seun replied. "You did. You benefited too." "I was deceived. You were willing," Kunle corrected sharply. That truth lingered long after the call ended. Meanwhile, public sympathy tilted slowly toward Mona. Not because she sought it, but because composure under scrutiny commands respect. One evening, as the boys prepared to return to Accra temporarily, while legal proceedings unfolded, Ryan asked something unexpected. "Are we part of this company now?" Mona looked at Seun before answering. "Only if you choose to be." Seun nodded. "They will inherit," he said firmly, "but they will not be controlled." The statement was aimed not at Mona, but at his mother. As investigations intensified, Mama Bisi retreated from public appearances. For decades, she had operated behind the curtain of influence. Now, light crept closer. Evidence suggested she had been aware of suppressed male fertility results. Not orchestrator, but informed participant. Legacy had demanded silence. Silence had demanded sacrifice, and the sacrifice had been Mona. The formal charges against Dr. Balogan were announced 2 weeks later. Medical license suspended pending trial, fraud, record manipulation, collusion. Kunle resigned for personal reasons within 48 hours. But resignation did not shield him from inquiry. Inside the Adawale Tower, employees whispered that the empire was undergoing purification. Stocks stabilized. Investors appreciated transparency more than secrecy. Seon understood something profound then. The scandal had not weakened his company. The lie had. One night, standing alone in his office overlooking Lagos Lagoon, he dialed Mona. "I should have listened," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "I am sorry." She did not answer immediately. "Apology is acknowledgement," she said finally. "Repair is action. I will act, I know." Silence followed, not bitter, just honest. 15 years earlier, she had been escorted out of that building, barefoot. Now her name was restoring integrity to it. But the final reckoning had not yet arrived, because investigations would uncover one more truth. And when that surfaced, the question would not be about inheritance. It would be about forgiveness. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the pattern became. What had first appeared as isolated medical fraud now revealed itself as a coordinated effort to protect reputation at all costs. Regulatory auditors uncovered encrypted correspondence between Dr. Tad Balogan and an executive email linked indirectly to Kunle Arogundade's office. Payment memos referenced reputation management. Internal timestamps aligned precisely with the months Mona's hormone levels had been altered. But one discovery shook Oluwaseun Adewale more than the rest. A separate medical file, his file had been flagged in the clinic's archive database. Original fertility analysis from 15 years earlier. Marked reduced motility, hormonal imbalance, temporary suppression likely. Stamped, do not release to patient. Seun stared at the scanned copy in disbelief. The document carried Dr. Balogan's signature. Below it a handwritten note. Discuss with family matriarch before disclosure. Family matriarch. His mother. He drove directly to Mama Bisi's residence without notifying anyone. She received him in the sitting room, where she had once pronounced Mona's failure as fact. "You knew," he said without greeting. Mama Bisi did not feign ignorance. "I suspected," she corrected. "You saw my results." "Yes, and you said nothing." Her expression remained composed, but her hands trembled slightly against her cane. "You were vulnerable," she said. "Young, ambitious. The company was expanding rapidly. Investors watched every weakness, so you let them label her weak instead." Mama Bisi's jaw tightened. A man leading an empire cannot appear flawed, and a woman can, he demanded. She was not carrying the name. She was carrying the blame. Silence thickened. For the first time in his life, Seun saw his mother not as strategist, but as architect of silence. "You destroyed my marriage," he said quietly. "I preserved your power. At what cost?" She did not answer. Across the gulf in Accra, Mona received a secure message from her lawyer. "They have uncovered Seun's original medical file. Evidence of suppression." Mona sat still for a long moment. The final piece. The truth she had suspected, but never fully confirmed. She did not feel triumph. She felt validation. That evening she told the boys. "There was never anything wrong with me," she said. Yasin nodded slowly. "We knew." Zaid asked quietly. "Was there something wrong with him?" "Yes," Mona answered honestly. But temporary. Rayon leaned back. So, pride chose silence. Yes. The simplicity of that conclusion carried more weight than courtroom arguments. Back in Lagos, Seun convened a press conference. Not orchestrated by PR, not diluted by legal language. He stood before cameras alone. 15 years ago, he began, voice steady but stripped of corporate polish. I ended my marriage based on incomplete and manipulated medical information. I failed to question that information because it protected my pride. The room fell silent. My former wife, Mona El Sayed, was not infertile. She was misrepresented. I accept responsibility for my silence. He did not mention his mother. He did not mention Kunle directly. But he did announce full cooperation with regulatory authorities and the establishment of a medical ethics foundation in Mona's name. Reporters erupted with questions. "Will you remarry her?" one shouted. He paused. "This is not about reclaiming a past. It is about correcting a wrong." The statement traveled across West Africa within hours. Public opinion shifted decisively. Mona watched the conference replay only once. When it ended, she turned off the screen. "Does that change anything?" Zaid asked. "It changes his posture," she replied. 2 weeks later, formal charges were filed against Dr. Balogun and Kunle. Financial fraud, medical record tampering, conspiracy. Mama Bisi was not charged, but her public influence diminished dramatically. Board members quietly reduced her advisory role. One afternoon, Seun flew to Accra. No security, no entourage. He arrived at Mona's office, a modest but efficient building overlooking the port. Employees straightened as he entered. Power still followed him, but humility walked beside it now. Mona met him in the conference room. They sat across from each other, not as adversaries, not as spouses, as two people connected by truth. I exposed everything he said. I saw. I did not name my mother. I know. He exhaled. She believed she was protecting me. "And you?" Mona asked. I believed what was convenient. Silence lingered, not bitter, just honest. "I cannot undo 15 years, he said. "No," she agreed, "but I can be present now." She studied him carefully. "Presence is not ownership. I understand." He hesitated. "I would like the boys to spend part of their holidays in Lagos, not as heirs in training, as sons." Mona did not answer immediately. She weighed stability against resentment. "You will not introduce them to corporate politics prematurely," she said finally. "They are children first." He nodded. "I promise." The boys entered the room at Mona's signal. Seun stood. "I would like to know you," he said simply. Yasin stepped forward first. "Knowing takes time," he replied. Zaid added, "And consistency." Rayan finished. "Not speeches." Seun managed a faint smile. "Understood." As they walked together toward the balcony overlooking Accra's port cranes, Mona watched from behind. Not with longing, not with fear, with clarity. The empire she had once been expelled from was no longer her battleground. It was simply one branch of her son's future. That night, as Seun prepared to return to Lagos, he asked her one final question. "Do you ever regret leaving?" She considered it carefully. "No," she said. "If I had stayed, I would have become small, and now I am complete." He nodded slowly. For the first time in 15 years, the air between them held no accusation, only acknowledgement. But healing is not instant. It is layered, and though public justice had begun, private forgiveness remained unwritten. The next chapter would not test power. It would test trust. Trust did not arrive with headlines. It arrived in small, awkward gestures. The first time the boys visited Lagos alone, Mona insisted on clear boundaries. They would stay in a separate residence, owned by Adewale Holdings, not the Ikoyi mansion where she had once lived. They would meet their grandmother in a neutral setting. They would not attend board meetings. They would not be photographed for public relations campaigns. Seun agreed to every condition without negotiation. That alone unsettled Mama Bisi. When the boys arrived, Lagos greeted them differently than it had greeted Mona 15 years earlier. No security escorted them out of ballrooms. No whispers trailed behind their footsteps. Instead, staff observed quietly, curious, respectful. At the private residence overlooking the lagoon, Seon attempted what he had not done in years. He cooked. The result was unevenly seasoned jollof rice. Yasin noticed first. "You don't measure," he said. Seon looked surprised. "How do you know you never measured during dinner speeches either?" Zaid replied calmly. Ryan smiled faintly. "You improvise." Seon laughed genuinely, not diplomatically. It was a beginning. Meanwhile, Mona remained in Accra, watching from a distance, not out of distrust, but discipline. She refused to hover. Trust required space. Yet inside her an old ache stirred. Not romantic longing, not resentment, something quieter. Memory. One afternoon in Lagos, Seun took the boys to a rural electrification project site outside the city. Dust rose as trucks moved equipment across uneven terrain. Workers paused when they saw him approach. "Why are we here?" Rayan asked. "Because power is not about buildings," Seun answered. "It's about people." They walked through a small village where newly installed solar panels glinted under the sun. Children ran between houses made of clay and corrugated metal. Zaid observed carefully. "Did you build this for publicity?" he asked. "No," Seun said, though publicity followed. Yasin crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Then why did you hide us?" The question struck harder than expected. Seun did not deflect. "I was afraid," he said, of what Rayan pressed. Looking weak, Yasin shook his head slightly. "You looked weaker without us." The statement lingered in the warm air. Back in Accra, Mona received an unexpected visitor, Mama Bisi. The older woman arrived unannounced at her office, leaning on her cane, pride intact but tempered. Employees hesitated at the doorway before allowing her through. Mona stood to greet her. "Mrs. Adewale," she said calmly. "Mona Mama Bisi," replied, omitting titles. They sat facing each other. For years, this woman had symbolized judgment and silence. Now she looked older, smaller. "You have raised strong boys," Mama Bisi began. "Yes, I underestimated you." "That is common," Mona replied evenly. Mama Bisi's eyes flickered with something resembling regret. "I believed I was protecting my son's empire. You were protecting his ego." Silence. Mama Bisi exhaled slowly. "When I saw those medical results, I feared investors would doubt him. I chose secrecy, and chose me as sacrifice. I thought you would recover elsewhere," Mama Bisi admitted quietly. "I did," Mona said. "But not because of your intentions." The older woman lowered her gaze. "For what it is worth, I am sorry." The words did not erase history, but they mattered. Mona nodded once. "Apology does not restore 15 years, she said gently. "But acknowledgement prevents repetition." Mama Bisi looked up. "Will you ever return?" Mona smiled faintly. "I never left myself." The conversation ended without reconciliation, but without hostility. In Lagos, the boys' visits continued. They learned about board structures and energy grids, but only through observation. Seun resisted pressure from executives to introduce them publicly as heirs. "They are not branding tools," he told the board firmly. Kunle's former seat remained empty, symbolic of a chapter closed. One evening, while walking along the marina, Zaid asked his father quietly, "Do you love our mother?" The question halted him mid-step. "Yes," he said. "Still, love does not expire," he answered carefully. "But it changes form." Rayan looked thoughtful. "Then why don't you ask her to come back?" Seun stared out at the water. "Because loving someone does not mean owning their future." The boys absorbed that. Back in Accra, Mona received an invitation. Not from Seun, from the West African Trade Council. She had been nominated for a Regional Logistics Innovation Award. The ceremony would be held in Lagos, public, high profile. Seun's name was also on the program as keynote speaker. Mona hesitated. Attending meant stepping fully into the same spotlight that had once expelled her. Declining meant avoiding closure. She chose to attend. On the night of the ceremony, Mona wore blue, not gold, not armor, confidence. The hall, filled with business leaders, diplomats, entrepreneurs. When her name was announced as recipient of the Logistics Resilience Award, applause rose steadily, not out of pity but respect. She stepped onto the stage alone. Her acceptance speech was simple. "Resilience is not loud," she said. "It is built quietly through discipline and integrity. When truth is delayed, it does not disappear. It waits." The audience stood. Seun watched from his table, not as her husband, as witness. Later that evening, they found themselves alone backstage. "You have built something extraordinary," he said. "So have you," she replied. He hesitated. "I cannot ask you to return." "You should not," she said gently. "But I would like to build something different," he continued. "Not marriage, partnership, as co-parents, as equals." She studied him carefully. "That requires consistency. I am learning." A quiet understanding passed between them. Not reconciliation, not romance, alignment. The boys joined them moments later, energy filling the room. "Are we celebrating?" Yasin asked. "Yes," Mona said. "For what?" Ryan smiled. "For growth," as cameras flashed outside and applause echoed faintly from the hall. Mona realized something profound. Justice had not restored the past. It had redefined the future. The man who once cast her aside now stood beside her, not above, not ahead. Beside. Trust was still fragile. But it was no longer impossible. And sometimes that is enough to begin again. Growth is quiet until it is threatened. Just as stability began settling into a new rhythm between Accra and Lagos, pressure returned not from headlines, not from regulators, but from within the shadowed corners of power that resist change. The formal trial against Dr. Ted Balogun was approaching. Evidence was overwhelming. Financial trails traced through shell consultancies. Testimony from Nurse Nkem Obi confirmed direct instructions to alter lab results and suppress male fertility data. But trials unsettle more than defendants. They expose systems. And systems do not collapse without resistance. One evening in Accra, Mona received an encrypted message from her lawyer in Lagos. Unexpected development. Balogun claims he was pressured by senior corporate officers. He intends to testify fully. Mona read the message twice. Testify fully meant naming names. Naming names meant destabilizing those who had survived quietly through resignations and internal reshuffles. Later that night, Yasin noticed her still awake in the study. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Something is shifting," she replied. "Toward us, toward truth." He nodded slowly. "Truth always shakes something," he said. She smiled faintly. The following morning, Seun called unexpectedly. "They're trying to discredit you," he said without preamble. "Who former associates of Kunle. They are pushing a narrative that you orchestrated the pregnancy to regain influence." Mona did not flinch. "Let them speak. This could become messy." "It already was," she said calmly. Seun hesitated. "They are also questioning the timeline of the boy's birth. That can be verified medically," she replied. "They know that. It's not about facts. It's about noise." Mona leaned back in her chair. "Noise is temporary. Damage can linger. So can lies," she answered. Across the city in Lagos, a small media outlet published an insinuating article. "Strategic return businesswoman re-enters empire with hidden heirs." The language was subtle, but intentional. Mona chose not to respond publicly. Instead, she gathered the boys that evening. "People may question your existence," she said plainly. Zaid's jaw tightened. "Why? Because power does not surrender quietly." Ryan crossed his arms thoughtfully. Do we answer them? No, she said. We live correctly. Yasin nodded. Let our actions speak. Meanwhile, inside Adewale Holdings, internal tension resurfaced. Several board members expressed concern that reopening old wounds could invite regulatory overreach. A minority suggested a private settlement to close remaining investigations quietly. Sun refused. If we silence this now, he told them firmly, we become the same thing again. Mama Bisi watched from the corner of the boardroom, her presence quieter than before. For decades, she had believed containment was protection. Now she began to see containment as corrosion. The day before Balogun's court testimony, an unmarked car followed Mona from her office to her residence in Accra. She noticed it immediately. Discipline had sharpened her awareness long ago. She altered her route twice. The car remained. She called local authorities discreetly and documented the license plate. By the time she reached home, the vehicle had disappeared. That night she informed Seun. I will increase security, he said instantly. No, she replied. Do not escalate visibly. It signals fear. They are targeting you. They are desperate. Silence lingered between them. I will not allow harm to reach you, he said quietly. You cannot control everything, she answered gently. But you can remain steady. In Lagos, the courtroom filled beyond capacity on the day of testimony. Journalists lined the corridors. Balogun entered under escort, once confident, now visibly strained. Under oath, he began, cautiously. Yes, I altered medical reports. Gasps rippled through the room, under whose instruction the prosecutor pressed. Balogun hesitated. Consultation occurred with corporate representatives. Names. He swallowed. Kunle Arogundade authorized funding, and I was advised that the family matriarch wished to avoid reputational damage. The room shifted. Mama Bisi did not attend, but she watched the live broadcast from her residence. Her hand trembled slightly as Balogun continued. The male fertility results indicated temporary suppression. I was instructed not to release them to the patient, who instructed that the prosecutor demanded. Balogun hesitated again. I received indirect communication through Mr. Arogundade. Seun closed his eyes briefly as the testimony unfolded. Responsibility had layers, but avoidance was no longer an option. By evening, arrest warrants were issued for additional financial conspirators connected to Kunle's network. Kunle himself had already relocated temporarily to London. Extradition proceedings began. Public reaction intensified. Now the narrative had shifted entirely. It was no longer about a woman reclaiming status. It was about systemic manipulation. Back in Accra, Mona watched the testimony replay in silence. Ryan sat beside her. Does this feel like victory? He asked. She shook her head. It feels like exposure. Is that enough for justice? She replied. Yes. The next morning, Seun arrived in Accra unannounced. He entered Mona's office with urgency in his posture. They are trying to intimidate witnesses, he said. Who former associates of Kunle? Nkem received threats. Mona's expression hardened. We cannot let fear silence them again. I have assigned legal protection, Seun assured her. She studied him carefully. Do you regret opening this? He did not hesitate. No. For the first time in years, she believed him completely. But threats rarely disappear quietly. Later that week, a small explosion damaged one of Adewale Holdings' minor storage facilities on the outskirts of Lagos. No injuries, but the message was clear. Resistance. Board members panicked. End this publicly, one urged Seun. Stability matters. Seun stood firm. Stability built on silence is fragile, he said. In Accra, Mona gathered her sons again. If pressure increases, she said calmly, we remain disciplined. Zaid's eyes sharpened. They are trying to scare us. Yes. Are you afraid? Ryan asked. She met his gaze. I am alert, not afraid. Yasin nodded slowly. Then we stand. The boys were no longer children navigating confusion. They were young men observing power tested under scrutiny, and they were learning something invaluable. Integrity demands endurance. As legal proceedings advanced and conspirators faced mounting evidence, public opinion solidified decisively. The narrative that once expelled Mona had inverted completely. Not through spectacle, through persistence. Yet one final challenge remained. Because justice in court does not guarantee healing in hearts. And the next decision Mona would face would not be legal, it would be personal. The final court ruling arrived on a Tuesday morning, heavy with humidity. Dr. Tata Balogan was found guilty of medical fraud, record manipulation, and conspiracy to conceal patient data. His license was permanently revoked. Financial penalties were severe. Criminal sentencing followed. Kunle Arogundade, extradited after months of legal maneuvering, faced parallel charges: corporate conspiracy, financial misconduct, obstruction of medical transparency. The courtroom was packed. Mona did not attend. She listened from Accra, seated at her office desk, hands folded calmly in front of her. The boys were at school. She had chosen not to turn justice into spectacle for them. When the verdict was announced, she closed her eyes not in celebration, but in completion. 15 years earlier, she had been escorted out of a ballroom as a liability. Now the system had acknowledged that she had been wronged. But acknowledgement did not erase memory. In Lagos, outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Seun. "Do you feel vindicated?" one asked. He shook his head slightly. "Vindication belongs to truth. I am accountable for my silence." "Will you seek reconciliation with your former wife?" another pressed. "This is not a romantic story," he replied evenly. "It is a lesson." Back in Accra, Mona received a call from Seun that evening. "It's done," he said quietly. "Yes. Kunle will likely face sentencing next month." "I expected that." Silence lingered, not strained, not distant, just reflective. "There is one more thing," he said. "What my mother?" Mona exhaled slowly. "What about her?" "She wants to see you. Properly." The request carried weight. Mama Bisi had apologized privately, but never fully confronted the consequences of her decisions. When Mona asked, "She is unwell," Seun said. Not critically, but, "Aging reveals what power hides." Mona did not respond immediately. Forgiveness is not immediate. It is deliberate. 3 days later, she flew to Lagos, alone. No press, no announcement. The Ikoyi mansion felt smaller than she remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Mama Bisi waited in the same sitting room, where she had once declared Mona's failure. Age had softened her posture. Her cane rested beside her chair. Mona entered without hesitation. They faced each other in silence for several seconds. "You look strong," Mama Bisi said finally. "I am." "You always were," the older woman admitted. Mona sat opposite her. For years, resentment had been justified. Now something else replaced it: clarity. "I read the court transcripts," Mama Bisi continued. "They mentioned my involvement." "Yes, you did not request charges." "No." Mama Bisi's hands tightened around her cane. Why? Mona considered her answer carefully. "Because you acted from fear, not malice." The older woman's eyes filled not dramatically, but with restrained emotion. "I believed weakness would destroy my son," she said. "I did not realize secrecy would. Power without vulnerability corrodes," Mona replied softly. Mama Bisi nodded faintly. "I watched you that night," she said quietly, "when you walked out of the gala. I expected you to beg. I do not beg for dignity. I see that now." The air shifted. Not reconciliation, not absolution, recognition. "I cannot return what was taken," Mama Bisi whispered. "No," Mona agreed. "But you can ensure it is not taken again." Later that afternoon, Seun joined them. The three sat together for the first time in 15 years without accusation filling the space. I will step back from advisory influence, Mama BC announced. The company must evolve. Seun looked surprised. Are you certain? Yes. For a woman who had shaped strategy from behind curtains, stepping back required more courage than speaking publicly ever had. Mona observed quietly. Legacy was being redefined not by bloodline alone, but by accountability. That evening the boys arrived from the airport. They entered the mansion cautiously, not as claimants, as visitors. Mama BC looked at them for a long time before speaking. You resemble your father, she said. Yasin responded evenly. We resemble our mother too. A faint smile touched her lips. Good. Dinner that night was quiet, respectful. No speeches, no declarations, just conversation. Ryan asked about family history. Zaid asked about Yoruba traditions. Yasin asked about succession structures. Mama BC answered honestly. For the first time, the room held no hierarchy, only lineage. After dinner, Mona stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the lagoon. Seun joined her. Is this closure? He asked. She watched the water, carefully. It is accountability, she said, and us. She turned toward him. There is no us as before, I know. But there is co-parenting, partnership, respect. He nodded slowly. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently. You would still have faced truth, eventually, she replied. Would you have stayed? She paused. Yes, she admitted. If you had listened. The honesty did not wound, it clarified. He exhaled slowly. I cannot rewrite history. No, she said gently. But you can write differently, now. Inside the house, the boys laughed softly with their grandmother over a childhood story of Seun's stubbornness. The sound carried outward. Mona felt something shift, not restoration. Peace. Justice had been served publicly. Accountability had been spoken privately. The next decision would not involve courts. It would involve the future. Because legacy was no longer an abstract ambition. It had names. Yasin, Zaid, Ryan, and those names required more than recognition. They required guidance. Seun looked toward the living room where the boys sat. I want them to inherit differently, he said quietly. Then raise them differently, Mona replied. He nodded, and for the first time since that gala 15 years earlier, silence between them felt neither heavy nor defensive. It felt earned. Legacy no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like responsibility. In the months following the court rulings, Adawale Holdings underwent structural reform. Independent ethics oversight was introduced. Medical partnerships were reviewed under transparent guidelines. Succession planning documents were revised not hurriedly, not politically, but carefully. The triplets were officially recognized as legal heirs, not positioned on billboards, not paraded through shareholder meetings, but registered within private governance documents with clarity and protection. Mona insisted on one condition above all others. They will choose their own path. Seun agreed. The boys returned to Accra to complete their academic year, uninterrupted. Their lives did not revolve around Lagos headlines. They attended classes trained in athletics, volunteered in community literacy programs Mona had quietly supported for years. Public interest gradually faded. Scandal lost its shine. Truth remained. One evening, nearly a year after the verdict, the family gathered again, this time in Accra, at Mona's home overlooking the port. No formal agenda, no legal updates, just dinner. Yasin, now taller than his father, spoke first. I've been thinking about engineering, he said. Renewable systems. Zaid added, I'm more interested in architecture, infrastructure design. Rayan smiled faintly. I want law, systems that prevent what happened. Seun listened without interruption. These are not expectations, Mona reminded them gently. They are options. Seun nodded. Whatever you pursue, he said, do not inherit my pride. The boys exchanged glances. "We won't," Yasin replied. Later that night, as dishes were cleared and conversation softened, Seun approached Mona on the balcony. "Do you ever regret not fighting publicly earlier?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "If I had fought, then I would have been labeled bitter," she said. "Instead, I built, and now I do not need to prove anything." He leaned against the railing beside her. "I thought power protected me," he admitted, "but it isolated me. Power amplifies character," she replied quietly. "It does not replace it." He absorbed that in silence. Inside, Mama Bisi sat with the boys, telling them stories of their grandfather's early business failures, details she had never shared before. Failure no longer carried shame in that house. It carried lesson. A week later, Seun invited Mona to attend the inauguration of the Mona El Sayed Medical Ethics Foundation in Lagos, a program funded privately by Adewale Holdings to support transparency in reproductive health care across West Africa. She hesitated, not because she doubted the intention, but because symbolism is powerful. In the end, she agreed. The foundation launch was modest. No grand spectacle, no self-congratulatory speeches. Seun spoke briefly. "Integrity delayed is still integrity," he said. "We cannot undo harm, but we can prevent repetition." Then he stepped aside and invited Mona to speak. She approached the podium calmly. "Truth does not shout," she said. "It persists. When systems fail, individuals must rebuild systems. This foundation is not about my story. It is about accountability in healthcare." Applause followed, not explosive, but steady. Afterward, reporters approached her with familiar questions. "Will you remarry?" She smiled politely. "I have already built a complete life." The answer required no elaboration. In private months later, Seun asked her something more vulnerable. "Is there space for friendship?" She considered it thoughtfully. "There is space for respect," she said. "Friendship grows from consistency." He accepted that without protest. Time did the rest. Years did not rewind. They advanced. The boys entered university, 2 in Ghana, 1 in Nigeria, by choice, not obligation. They navigated identity with confidence, never hiding their lineage, never exploiting it. When tabloids occasionally resurfaced old headlines, the triplets responded the same way, every time, by living well. Mona continued expanding her logistics firm, now a respected cross-border operator. She mentored young female entrepreneurs, quietly funding scholarships for women in supply chain management. Seun remained a powerful businessman, but no longer an untouchable one. He attended community forums without entourage. He listened more than he spoke. Mama Bisi aged gracefully, her influence now measured in counsel rather than command. One evening, long after the initial storm had passed, Mona and Seun sat at a cafe overlooking the Lagos waterfront while waiting for the boys to join them. "You once said legacy requires sacrifice," Mona said softly. He nodded. "I was wrong about what needed sacrificing." "What did it require?" she asked. "Pride," he answered. She smiled faintly. "That would have saved us 15 years. He did not argue. "But those 15 years gave us something else," he said quietly. "What perspective?" She looked out at the water. Perhaps he was right. If she had remained in that marriage under silence, she might have become smaller. If he had never faced exposure, he might have remained rigid. Growth had not come gently. It had come through fracture. The boys approached, laughter carrying ahead of them. They were no longer children standing in a marble lobby proving resemblance. They were young men shaping their own narratives. As they sat together, no hierarchy, no tension, Mona felt something steady settle inside her. Not vindication, not triumph, completion. 15 years earlier, she had walked out of a ballroom barefoot. Today she stood on her own ground fully. Justice had not returned what was lost. It had clarified what mattered, and what mattered was never the empire. It was dignity, It was truth. It was choice. When they rose to leave, Seun paused briefly beside her. "Thank you," he said, "for what she asked, for refusing to disappear." She met his gaze calmly. "I was never invisible." As they walked into the evening air, the city lights shimmered, not as symbols of power, but as reminders that even the brightest towers cast shadows, and shadows only disappear when light is allowed in. Some wounds do not bleed in public. They bleed quietly, in living rooms, in clinics, in conversations where pride is louder than truth. Mona El Sayed's story is not about revenge. It is about what happens when silence protects the wrong narrative and what changes when someone refuses to carry a lie any longer. In many communities, infertility still carries stigma. Women are blamed first. Men hide behind tradition. Families choose reputation over transparency. But real strength is not in protecting ego. It is in protecting integrity. Oluwaseun Adewale lost 15 years to pride. Mona lost 15 years to injustice, yet neither allowed those years to define the rest of their lives. Justice did not mean returning to the past. It meant correcting the record. Healing did not mean forgetting pain. It meant refusing to let pain dictate the future. If this story moved, you tell us, what country are you watching from? What time is it where you are right now? Your voice matters here. Have you ever seen pride destroy something that truth could have saved? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe in stories of justice, healing, and second chances, subscribe to the channel. Like and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave is not wealth. It is courage to choose truth.